Jai Shri Ram. We often hear in Indian political and social discourse the slogan unity in diversity, and we get this message that the reason why India is united, or Indian culture or Hindu society is united, is because there is so much diversity in it, and isn't this beautiful, and so on and so forth. And I think that for any kind of right-leaning person ideologically, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because diversity means difference, and if you have internal differences within your group, whether it's a religious group, ethnic group, national identity, or whatever the case may be, then it's inherently disunited. And I think that we also have to understand that when we talk about diversity within Hindu society, that diversity is fairly narrow, in the sense that yes, there's an incredible amount of diversity within Indian culture if you were to compare it to, other cultures around the world that do not have such diversity, right? Which would, of course, be every other culture in the world because of how diverse India is. But the diversity that we have is diversity within kind of a narrow range, so that there is an underlying unity that exists within all facets of our culture. And it's only on top of that that there are, from what I would think, basically minor differences that, create all of the different regional cultures and so on that we have. So, for example, we hear this phrase that if you travel 10 kilometers or X number of kilometers in India, the food changes, this changes, that changes, right? Now, if you think about Indian food, this is true at the level of actual dishes that people are eating, right? And so if you're from the southern part of some state, you compare your cuisine to the central part or the northern part or neighboring states, you see all of these differences, right? But broadly, there are so many similarities within Indian cuisine, in the sense that people are eating rice, they're eating wheat, they're eating other things like jawar or ragi and bajra and things like that are made into some bread. They're eating dal, which is cooked in not that many different ways, honestly. And you're eating some kind of sabji or sabji-like dish where, people are sauteing vegetables, putting some spices and tadka on it, and eating that with, chapati or rice and dal or whatever they're eating. There are basically families of food groups within which different regions of states and different states have kind of specialities of what they add. Do you add tamarind? Do you add this or that? What do you add or omit from a certain dish? But in general, things are very similar, in the sense that you could show any Indian from any region of the country a Chinese dish or an Iranian dish or an Arab dish or Vietnamese dish, and they would easily recognize that it's not Indian. Whereas if you showed them dishes from different parts of India that they're not from, even though they may not have eaten it, they may not have cooked it, they may not have even known how to cook it, they would still recognize it as being Indian, just from a different region, right? And you can say the same thing about other cultural traits, like, for example, language. We know that within India, you basically only have two major linguistic families, the so-called Indo-Aryan language family in the northern and central parts of the country, and the Dravidian languages in the south. And these two broad groupings obviously have an enormous amount of similarities with one another. But even if you're comparing Dravidian and Indo-Aryan languages, you see so many similarities in terms of phrasing, and an enormous number of words that basically exist in all of these languages because they were borrowed from Sanskrit, or they were borrowed from, one of these other languages because there was so much cultural exchange within the subcontinent. And, it even gets to the point of actual phrases that word for word are translated. So, for example, if you hear Indians speaking English, sometimes, or at least something that I've seen a lot, is that people will say do one thing when they really mean in English, can you do me a favor, or something like that. And we know that in Hindi, you would say ek kaam karo for this phrase, right? Now, in my language, Kannada, we would say ಒಂದು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿ, which is literally means exactly the same thing as ek kaam karo. Ek and Vandu means ek, Kelsa means come, and Madi means karo. It's literally the same exact phrase, but with Kannada words instead of Hindi words. So I would assume that, other Indian languages probably have the same exact phrase. Also, and you even hear people translating that into English, even when, in British English or American English, this is not something that people would say, but they do say it in Indian English. So that's just one example. But the broader point that I'm trying to make is that it's beautiful and interesting to celebrate all this diversity that we have, especially when, especially for people like me who were not even born and raised in India. And so even though I am a Kannadiga, I didn't grow up around a bunch of Kannadigas outside of, the influence that I get from my family and family friends and so on. So I'm very used to kind of interacting with a lot of Indians of, either first generation or second generation that come from different, maybe come from Hindi-speaking families, maybe come from different regional languages, and it is interesting to see the differences that we have. But what is actually important to understand, which is what identity and your sense of who you are is founded upon, is not about more or less trivial differences that are very narrow in scope, that really only matter in terms of your day-to-day lifestyle habits. But at the core of who we are, as Hindus, we're all basically the same, and that's what really should be emphasized whenever we talk about diversity, that it's not that unity exists where there is diversity. It's that there is an underlying strength of unity that exists, and then on top of that, as long as you stay within that range of cultural traits and values and ideas, then you can have a lot of diversity, right? We all know that in Hinduism, there are all these different sampradayas that teach different kinds of ideas, right? But broadly, they all teach many of the same things. I mean, they all have the same pantheon of deities. They all believe in karma. They all believe in reincarnation. They all look at ahimsa and vegetarianism as at least something to, it's a value to kind of hold on to and aspire to and so on. And it's these kinds of similarities that exist that unify us, not the fact that within that there are differences. So, I would just encourage everybody whenever you hear this kind of phrase, or, whether it's in media or whether it's in conversations with actual people that you know, that you always talk about, and if it's in a real conversation, always push back and say, diversity isn't uniting. Within unity, there might be some diversity as kind of a happenstance that's not really important to whether you're united or not. And that's the case that we have in our culture. That's the case that you have in literally any culture where there is some level of diversity, right? Obviously, I was born and raised in the United States, as you can tell from the way that I speak English and also from things that I've said in other videos. And the United States likes to claim that it's very diverse. Now, if you've ever actually lived here and interacted with people and observed society, you find that the actual diversity in terms of worldviews and how people think and act and what kinds of values that they have, those are extremely narrow. What does exist in America is a large amount of diversity of genetics, that you have a lot of people from different places in Europe. You have blacks, you have Latinos, you have Asians. You have all these different ethnic, racial groups coming here and then, unfortunately, assimilating into this kind of amorphous blob of modern, Western, secular kind of a culture. But, what actually keeps American society together is not the fact that there are people of different skin colors that live here. It's because of the fact that, one, once people come here, they lose the vast majority of what makes them actually distinct as a people, only preserving these very kind of nostalgic or meaningless traits of their former culture once they've been here for a couple generations. So again, even though the way that I'm putting that is very negative about what just said, regardless of whether it's negative or positive, it's still unity, an underlying unity of something meaningful that keeps you together, not differences. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Jai Shri Ram.